The sun rose over Charleston like it always did, slow, golden, indifferent. But inside the Whitaker Plantation's grand house, something had gone terribly wrong. 12 men lay scattered across polished floors and velvet chairs. Some had collapsed face-first into their dinner plates. Others had tried to crawl, leaving trails of vomit and desperation across imported rugs. Their faces were frozen in expressions of shock, mouths agape, eyes wide and glassy. Judge Hartley was slumped over his candied figs. Reverend Cole had fallen backward, one hand still clutching his belly. Master Edwin Whitaker himself, the lord of the estate, was draped across the head of the table like a discarded coat. Outside, the enslaved workers stirred in the pre-dawn darkness. They'd heard the groans during the night, seen candlelight flickering wildly through the windows, smelled something metallic and wrong in the air. But no one ran for help. No one screamed. They just watched, waited, because deep down they knew. When the constables finally arrived, boots echoing through marble hallways, hands trembling despite their authority, they found him standing exactly where you'd expect. Samuel, the cook, the quiet one, the man who'd served these masters for 2 decades without so much as raising his voice. He was still wearing his apron, still standing by the hearth. His back was straight, his eyes calm, his hands empty. No weapon, no blood, just the faint scent of cinnamon and bay leaf hanging in the air. Samuel, the constable's voice cracked. Did you do this? Samuel didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking at nothing and everything at once. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet, deliberate, chilling. They died free. That was all he said. And somehow, it was enough to make every armed man in that room take a step back. Long before Charleston. Long before the chains and the screams and the auction blocks. There was a river, a village, and a woman who knew the language of the earth. Her name was Nephilah. She was a healer in a land where memory was carved into wood and passed down through whispers. Nephilah didn't just treat wounds, she spoke to them. She knew which roots could stop a fever and which leaves could stop a heart. Her garden was sacred ground. Men didn't walk through it barefoot. Children didn't play near it. Everyone knew, what grew there could save you or end you, depending on her intentions. Samuel was born during a thunderstorm. The kind that splits the sky and makes the earth tremble. Nephilah said he didn't cry when he arrived, just opened his eyes and stared, like he'd already seen enough of the world to know it wasn't kind. He was small, fragile in body, but sharp in mind. While other boys ran and wrestled, Samuel watched. He learned. His mother taught him everything, how to read the wind, how to tell if a plant would heal or kill just by the way it bent toward sunlight. She showed him bark that could stop a heart in 4 beats. Roots that brought sleep so deep it looked like death. He who controls what goes into the body, she told him one evening, grinding herbs by firelight, controls the soul. Samuel laughed. He thought it was just one of her old riddles. Then the ships came. The chains were cold. The silence on that ship was colder. Nephilah was there at first, until one night Samuel woke and her chain was swinging empty. No goodbye. No body. Just gone. He was 10 years old when he arrived in Charleston. Alone. Branded. Renamed. But he hadn't forgotten what his mother taught him. The Whitaker Plantation didn't want Samuel for the fields. He was too small, too frail. So they threw him into the kitchen instead, a brick furnace behind the main house where the air never cooled and the fire never died. They thought they were giving him an easier life. They had no idea what they'd just done. The head cook was a woman named Miss Gertie. Freed on paper, enslaved in spirit. She ruled that kitchen with an iron fist and a sharp tongue. She slapped Samuel when the stew boiled over. Kicked him when he peeled potatoes too slow. But she also taught him, in that brutal way the world teaches the powerless to survive. Watch them eat, she'd whisper through cracked teeth. They show you who they are with every bite. And Samuel, he watched everything. He watched Master Edwin Whitaker chew slowly on his left side because his right jaw was swollen with rot. Watched Mr. Lambert drink warm wine before every meal or his stomach would seize. Watched Judge Hartley refuse pickled beets like they were poison. Turns out, he was allergic. Samuel didn't write any of this down. He didn't need to. At night, sitting alone on the kitchen step with blistered hands and a stained apron, he'd recite it all like a prayer. Toothaches, swollen bellies, weak hearts, shaky hands. He began pairing their ailments with plants his mother had taught him about. A bitter root for Edwin. A white powder for Lambert. Crushed seeds for Hartley. No one noticed the boy whispering to himself in the dark. They thought it was madness. It wasn't madness. It was memory. And memory, as it turns out, can be sharpened into the deadliest blade. When Miss Gertie dropped dead beside the oven one summer evening, Samuel inherited her apron. And everything changed. Her name was Adira. It meant strong in her mother's tongue, and strength was all she had left. She arrived during the rainy season when the rice fields flooded and mosquitoes swarmed like ghosts. Maybe 16, maybe older. No one kept track of ages for people they considered property. She had cinnamon-dark skin and eyes that refused to look down, even when the overseer barked orders in her face. Samuel saw her first from the kitchen window. She was carrying a grain sack on her back, barefoot in the mud, refusing to stumble while other girls whispered she wouldn't last a week. She lasted. And she didn't bend. They didn't have the luxury of romance. No letters, no courting, no stolen dances. Just glances by the well. Touches passed like contraband in the dark. He told her about his mother and the garden of healing. She told him about a brother sold to Georgia, a wound that never closed. One night, during a thunderstorm, she leaned close and whispered words that Samuel would carry forever. They think we are soil. But we remember the sky. He didn't sleep that night. Not because of the lightning, because for the first time in years, he felt something other than rage burning in his chest. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Not dead. Not beaten. Just erased. Sold to a sugar plantation in Louisiana. No warning. No farewell. Just her name scratched out of the Whitaker inventory like she'd never existed. Samuel asked the overseer why. She don't look down when she talked, the man said, spitting tobacco. Pride don't pick rice. Samuel didn't speak for 2 days. On the third day, he went to the garden behind the kitchen and began collecting things. Dark bark. Bitter roots. Seeds that smelled like iron. The reckoning had begun. Revenge doesn't happen overnight. It's not some sudden burst of fury. It's patient. Calculated. It grows slowly, like the plants Samuel began cultivating in the shadows behind the kitchen. Every plantation had a garden: mint, sage, rosemary, thyme. Harmless herbs for tea and seasoning. But Samuel's garden? That was different. Hidden in the dark, wet soil where no one bothered to look, he planted nightshade, castor bean, hemlock, and most sacred of all, oleander. Beautiful, delicate flowers that looked like they belonged in a lady's bouquet. But crush one leaf, brew it just right, and it could stop a heart in under an hour. Samuel tested everything carefully. A stray rat in the corner of the kitchen. A vicious dog no one would miss. He watched each death closely, how long it took, what symptoms appeared, how the body reacted. He adjusted doses like a musician tuning an instrument. Not too fast, not too slow. The goal was always the same, death that looked natural. Then he started building his list. 12 names. All regular guests at the Whitaker estate. All men who'd raised whips, signed sale papers, and smiled while children were ripped from their mother's arms. Judge Hartley, loved candied figs, history of fainting spells. Reverend Cole, allergic to shellfish, always complaining of stomach troubles. Master Edwin Whitaker, ulcers, swollen liver, addicted to fatty meats. Samuel didn't write it down. He didn't need to. The names lived in him like old scars, etched into memory alongside every cruelty he'd witnessed. At night, kneeling by the hearth while pretending to stir soup, he'd whisper the sequence under his breath. 12 guests. 12 plates. 12 goodbyes. 1 for Adira. 1 for his mother. 1 for every nameless soul buried in unmarked graves. Samuel wasn't just a cook anymore. He was a weapon. And he was almost ready. Samuel didn't just know their names. He knew their weaknesses. Their habits. Their bodies better than they knew themselves. Master Edwin Whitaker, Lord of the Plantation, glutton at heart. His liver was failing, and his love for pork fat was killing him slowly. Samuel would just speed things along. Pork belly cooked low and long, laced with crushed oleander leaf. The bitterness would vanish in the grease. The poison wouldn't. Judge Hartley, the man who once ruled that a slave girl brought her own suffering by being disobedient. He adored candied figs dipped in brandy. Samuel boiled foxglove into the syrup, letting its fatal kiss soak deep. The judge would die with sweetness on his tongue and poison in his veins. Reverend Cole, preacher of salvation, dealer of whips. He avoided shellfish but loved anything creamy. Samuel folded castor bean extract into his oyster stew. By the time the Reverend felt the fire in his gut, no prayer would reach him. Mr. Lambert, bloated belly, bourbon breath. Once broke a slave's ribs for singing too loud. A touch of arsenic in his favorite rye whiskey, masked by the smokiness he loved. Colonel Wexley, tobacco-spitting brute who humiliated kneeling men for sport. His final cigar, laced with monkshood. He'd never see it coming. Mr. Bryce, the banker who bought babies like livestock. He drank milk with every meal despite how it churned his stomach. Samuel gave him what he wanted, with a dose of belladonna. He'd die alone, pants down, on a privy that once denied slaves its use. And there were others. Young Beach, who branded women for fun. Dr. Miles, who swore black flesh felt less pain. 12 men. 12 poisons. 12 carefully chosen deaths. None of them saw the cook. None of them noticed the extra stir of the spoon or the way Samuel touched each plate like a priest offering last rites. To them, he was invisible. To the ancestors watching from unmarked graves, he was justice itself. July 4th, 1833. Independence Day. The irony wasn't lost on Samuel. Inside the Whitaker estate, 12 men gathered around a table that stretched longer than any family bond ever would. They wore their finest linens, laughed too loud, and clinked crystal glasses filled with wine bought by other people suffering. Samuel had risen before dawn. His hands were steady. His eyes, hollow but focused. Every dish had been planned like scripture. The pork belly for Edwin, glazed, caramelized, perfect. The fig preserves for Judge Hartley, shimmering like amber. The oyster stew for Reverend Cole, steaming gently in porcelain. Each plate positioned with precision. Each utensil polished to a shine. The table looked divine. And Samuel, for the first time in 20 years, he smiled. Not from joy, but because the scales were finally balanced. To freedom, one guest shouted, raising his glass. To the American spirit, another chimed in. The toast echoed. Crystal clinked. And Samuel served them, not with bitterness, but with the grace of a man carrying the weight of his ancestors. He moved silently from plate to plate, bowing slightly as he'd always done. No one noticed the flicker in his eye. No one asked why his hands didn't shake. They ate. Oh, how they ate! First came pleasure, the sweetness, the fat, the salt dancing on their tongues. Then came the silence. Judge Hartley dropped his fork first. His fingers curled. Foam appeared at his lips. Then Reverend Cole clutched his belly, eyes going wide. Edwin Whitaker stood, wheezing, face slick with sweat. He reached for water, for air, for anything, but found nothing. His lips turned blue. He collapsed into his plate. Chaos erupted. Chairs scraped. Men shouted. One crawled toward the door. Another vomited blood. And Samuel, he stood near the hearth, watching. Cold. Finally free. They dressed Samuel in a coarse white shirt for the trial. Called it decency, as if anything about Charleston had ever been decent. The courthouse stood like a monument to hypocrisy. White columns, red brick, black history bleeding between the mortar. They sat Samuel on a wooden stool in the center of the room, positioned too low for dignity, exactly as intended. The crowd packed every bench. Landowners, overseers, housewives in mourning veils. Even people who'd never set foot on a plantation came to see the cook who dared poison the gods of the South. But Samuel didn't see them. He saw his mother's hands grinding herbs by firelight. He saw Adira's face before they sold her. He saw the boy who took his own life after a master's daughter lied. He saw memory, not men. The prosecutor called it devilish. Premeditated murder of 12 honorable men. They presented vague coroner's notes that danced around the word poison without ever confirming it. No one could explain how 12 men fell on the same night at the same table from 12 different symptoms, unless the devil himself had walked into that kitchen. But they knew. They knew who had walked in. Witnesses testified. The maid said Samuel was always quiet. The stable boy said he was odd, always watching. A field hand claimed he heard Samuel whisper names in the dark. Even the butcher said he was too smart for his skin. Samuel never spoke. Not when the judge demanded a confession. Not when they offered him a priest. Not when they laid blood-stained aprons on the floor like evidence of war. He just sat there, straight-backed, eyes forward, as if the room didn't deserve to be seen. The verdict, guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. When the judge asked, why? Just that one word, Samuel looked up for the first time. So they'd never feel safe again. Dawn on July 5, 1833. The air carried a chill, as if the world itself hesitated. Charleston Square pulsed with silent anticipation. Lanterns glowed in windows. Merchants lingered. Children sat on shoulders. Everyone had come to watch justice, or at least what they called justice. At the center stood Samuel, still in that coarse white shirt, hands cuffed but posture unbowed. On his face, no fear, no regret. Just stillness that spoke louder than any speech. The sheriff climbed the gallows steps slowly, boots marking every heartbeat. He cleared his throat. Samuel, his voice wavered. For the murder of 12 men by poisoning on July 4, 1833, you are hereby condemned to death by public hanging. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some whispered curses. Others nodded as if finalizing an overdue contract. They offered Samuel a hood. He refused. His eyes remained visible, calm, piercing, entirely unbroken. Through them passed every memory. His mother sorting herbs. Adira looking to the sky. The boy who hanged himself in silence. The 12 bodies scattered across the Whitaker house, testament to patience, to justice, to ancestral precision. Make peace, Samuel, the sheriff said softly. Samuel lifted his chin. His whisper was barely audible, yet somehow it carried to every corner of that square. I have. The trapdoor opened with a groan. For a heartbeat, Samuel didn't fall, he rose. Like a spirit unshackled. Like a memory refusing erasure. Then gravity claimed him. The noose tightened. The breath left him. Stillness. They buried him in a shallow grave beyond the city limits. No marker. No ceremony. Just clay and forgotten names. They believed they'd snuffed out his story. They were wrong. Word spread first in the quarters, then along whispered paths, down rivers, across state lines, into every kitchen where enslaved hands prepared masters' meals. Samuel hadn't died. He'd become something else entirely. Samuel's story didn't end with that rope. It spread like fire through dry grass. Enslaved cooks spoke of him in whispers, as if he were still standing at the hearth, still watching, still waiting. He stirred justice into their plates, they'd say. He fed them their own cruelty. The legend grew. In Virginia, a cook refused to serve supper one evening and quietly burned the pantry. In Louisiana, 3 men were found foaming in their sleep, the kitchen door tied shut from the inside. In Georgia, a boy was caught carving a noose with 12 initials beneath it. No words. Just names. They said Samuel's ghost walked through kitchens at night, trailing smoke, hands still stained with justice. That fig tree at the Whitaker estate? The spring after his death, its blossoms turned deep red, though no one had watered it, no one had mourned near it. As if the roots drank blood instead of water. Paranoia spread through the slave-holding elite like fever. They suspected every cook, every servant, every child who touched their food. Masters restricted kitchen access. Some homes refused black staff altogether. Others forced overseers to supervise every meal. They baked bread only under white supervision. They refused oysters, figs, anything that might hide death. But the fear came too late. The spirit had flown. Among the enslaved, Samuel became a saint of resistance. Mothers whispered his name while weaving corn husks, teaching their children that vengeance could be served in silence. Among the white elite, he became a ghost story, a shameful whisper. They told it in parlor rooms not as history, but as warning. Samuel proved something that terrified them to their core, that the ones they called powerless had been watching all along. Learning, remembering, and that knowledge, wielded with patience, could bring even the mightiest to their knees. Justice, it turns out, is a dish best served cold.